Hi everyone, welcome to the December 8th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host Craig Milkowski. This week we're going to be recapping last weekend's stakes racing, where the focus really was on Aqueduct. They ran the final Grade 1 race of the season at the NYRA tracks. That was the Cigar Mile, the final race of the day on Saturday. There were three other graded stakes on that Saturday card, the two races for the 2-year-olds, the Remsen and the Demoiselle, as well as the Go for Wand. We'll discuss all of those, along with a couple other stakes races, a New York bred race from Sunday, and an allowance and maiden race that also took place there last week. Then we'll move on to Los Alamitos, where they ran their two graded stakes last weekend, the Grade 1 Starlet for the 2-year-old fillies, as well as the Bayakoa on Sunday. And we'll finish things up at Gulfstream Park, where on Saturday they had the Claiming Crown. Ton of stakes racing that took place there. We're going to discuss two of them, a couple horses that seem like they have some promise for the upcoming season. But Craig, we're going to start things out at Aqueduct, and I mean, I gotta say, we talked about it, we previewed this race last week. Not the strongest running of the Cigar Mile, and that's really how it did play out on the racetrack.
Yeah, it did, both visually, I think. True Timber ran fine. He ran one of his better races, but figure-wise, he got a 123, which is pretty weak for a Grade 1 race, but this time of year, I guess it's not a big surprise because it just wasn't the strongest field. We had talked about that perhaps Performer was the only real Grade 1 horse in the race. And for whatever reason, he just laid an egg. I mean, he didn't break great, but I don't think that explains the performance totally. He just didn't run particularly well and only got a 113. So I was surprised he didn't show up, but once he didn't, kind of the horses we expected on the forecast to offer the biggest challenge showed up and ran 1-2. I wasn't smart enough to play it that way. I kind of keyed on Performer, but overall, not the strongest race. I'm sure a race like the Cigar Mile is in no danger of being downgraded just because of the history. And I mean, you can't base it on 1 year, but this was not a strong race.
No, I don't think any of that is to take away from True Timber, because he is a pretty cool horse. He's a 6-year-old who was achieving his first stakes victory of any kind in this Cigar Mile, but he's a horse that's just been around, involved in graded stakes races for the past 3 or 4 seasons. I mean, I'm looking through his lifetime PPs now, and it seems like he's run in almost every graded stakes on the dirt in New York. Even going back to his 3-year-old season, he ran in the Withers, the Gotham, the Wood, the Dwyer, the Discovery. He's probably run in every graded stakes race on the dirt that he's been eligible for, at least at Aqueduct. And he's now running the Cigar Mile 3 years in a row, second and third, and now he finally gets his win in the race this year. Jack Sisterson has just done an amazing job with these Calumet Farm horses. He's gotten some runners from prior stables that have kind of seemed like they've been over the hill, a few of them, but he's gotten many of them back to their best efforts, and that's certainly the case with True Timber. Also, it should be mentioned, Kendrick Carmouche got his first ever Grade 1 victory in this Cigar Mile. Something that I know you were surprised about. I was surprised too. I assumed that it had already happened for him because he's been involved in many of these races going back a number of years. But just cool to see him get it done and the emotion that he showed after the race.
Yeah, that did surprise me. I just assumed. I mean, he's been a top rider and he's won many, many graded stakes, but just had never had that right horse to get him to Grade 1. So good to see that. And you could just see, you love seeing that kind of enthusiasm.
And as you said, there were some no-shows in this race. Obviously, you mentioned Performer. He was expected to prove that he was a Grade 1 type horse here. Didn't get to do it. I don't know how much stock I really want to put in his performance in this race, because for many of them, it was their first time running over a track like this. They had never been over sloppy sealed tracks before, at least Performer hadn't. He obviously never looked comfortable right from the start, as you said. King Guillermo, I mean, this was always going to be a tough spot for him to return from a layoff in. He didn't show up. Neither did Mr. Buff. So it definitely made it easier for a horse like True Timber to win, but not to take anything away from the winner. As I said, he ran his race and he got it done.
He did. And I did want to comment, there were no, as all the races we're going to talk about from Saturday, we don't have any of the fractions coded. So while it may have looked like a speed duel up front, it was just kind of a solid pace. So I'm not giving too much of an excuse to King Guillermo or Mr. Buff in this spot.
Let's move on to one of the earlier graded stakes on Saturday at Aqueduct. That was the Grade 2 Remsen for the 2-year-old males. And this is actually one of the faster races relative to the division that we saw this past weekend, as both Brooklyn Strong and the runner-up 10 for 10 each took a big step forward here off their prior performances, and that's something that we can definitely see with the 2-year-olds. They can improve by leaps and bounds within the span of a month or two, and I think these two just ran a very fast race. They really battled it out to the wire, drew well clear of the rest of the bunch, and they're two promising horses that as they turn 3-year-olds next season.
Yeah, they sure are. Brooklyn Strong has done very little wrong and keeps improving every time out. He jumped up to a 113 TimeformUS speed figure with his win here. 10 for 10. Had a nice effort as well. He actually got a 114 for setting the pretty quick pace. Again, not color-coded, but enough to give him a little bit of a pace boost on our figures. And then just a big gap back to known agenda. I do want to talk about the times on this day. Originally, I was a little leery just watching live, thinking maybe the wet track kind of was playing with the times a little bit, and maybe the gaps weren't really indicative of the difference between the horses. But when I sat down to make the figures, I mean, the day just lined up perfectly from start to finish. It doesn't look like the track really changed much at all. So I'm perfectly happy and confident in these figures and the others we're going to talk about from Saturday.
Yeah, Brooklyn Strong has really impressed me. He's obviously a New York bred, began his career in a claiming race. Actually, I was tweeting about this after he won. Going back to even before he ran, he's a horse that made it through the auction ring like 4 times, was an RNA a couple times, sold for some very cheap prices, ultimately went to his current connections for just $5,000. They risked him in a $40,000 claiming race first time out, and he's just improved his speed figure with every start. It seems like the more distance, the better for him. And in this race, I mean, 10 for 10, I thought he had no real excuse. I mean, the pace was maybe a little bit on the quick side, but he was doing it pretty easily. He was uncontested the entire way. Looked like he was a sure winner coming around the far turn, and Brooklyn Strong was just relentless coming after this horse, and he finally nailed him on the wire. I was impressed by both of these runners.
Yeah, and I agree with you on Brooklyn Strong. He just showed a lot of fight because he never gave up. It was a long, sustained run that he was able to make and keep going to the wire. Doesn't seem like any like extra distance will be any problem for him whatsoever. And I mean, this was 1.125 miles after all, so it's not like he'll have to go much longer. So really good effort from both the top two. But like you, I was really impressed by Brooklyn Strong.
Now, I do think we have to talk a little bit about the track on Saturday at Aqueduct. You mentioned the speed of the track and how you thought it was pretty consistent throughout the day. And I mean, I leave that up to you, and I saw nothing to dispute that. But a lot of people, I think, were making the case that there might have been a track bias on Saturday. I saw some arguing that the rail was not the place to be, and potentially that might have changed throughout the course of the day. Personally, I thought the track looked pretty fair. I mean, we do often see riders avoiding the rail just in general on race days like this when it's very sloppy. But I think as we talk about the Remsen and move on to the Demoiselle next, we can talk about that a little bit because 10 for 10 was on the rail for much of the way in the Remsen before drifting off a little bit in the stretch. And in the Demoiselle, Mala thought, the winner of this race, she had a trip, I think, not in a traditional sense because she saved ground the entire way and tipped out in the stretch and ran by the leader. But if you watch the rider's body language, Jean Velasquez, you could tell that this filly never looked comfortable racing inside, really right from the start when she was putting behind her stablemate heading into the first turn. And he was basically riding her for the final 6 furlongs of the race, and she finally responded when she got out into the clear. Now, was that a case of just the rail not being the place to be and her struggling through that going on the rail? And then when she finally got on the outside, she was able to do her running? Or was she just a filly that wasn't handling the sloppy track?
Yeah, this is probably one I'm going to have to watch a couple more times, but my initial reaction, and having watched the replay once already, is I don't think she liked being in behind horses more than it was the rail. I think once she got out, she responded just well, but I saw enough horses run well on the rail that I don't really think it was that big of an issue. I just think Malathot didn't like being down inside, maybe taking some of that kick back, and once she got clear, she flew home. Now, she only got a 98 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, actually regressed a couple points off her last one, but given the way she ran early in the race, that's not really a surprise. I'm not going to knock her too much on this. I would just think that she's a horse they're probably want to keep in the clear going forward.
Yeah, and it seemed like that wasn't necessarily the plan, to be stuck down on the inside, because Pletcher ran her long shot stablemate Traffic Lane, who was drawn one slot outside of her in post position number 2, and it seemed almost like they had hoped to have Kendrick send that horse to the front, and then Malathaat could take back and slot right outside her and get into that too wide stalking trip that I know Pletcher likes so much. But I don't think they anticipated that Milfoy would have so much improved tactical speed in this race, and Jean Rosario could see heading into that clubhouse turn, really kind of elbowed in John Velasquez and kept him locked in on the inside in that clubhouse turn, and it really kind of spelled out how the trip was going to go for Malathaat from there. And just credit to the winner who, when she got out into the clear, she really did kick it into another gear and get up there. Now, maybe the horses in front of her, including Milfoy, just didn't get the distance or were fading at the end. I think it was probably a little bit of that going on, but you don't often see horses who are ridden for the entire race like Malathaat was end up in the winner's circle. So I do want to give her some extra credit, and I do think it's valid to say that this performance might have been stronger than the 98 TimeformUS speed figure suggests, but how much stronger it was, I think it remains to be seen.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we've seen some really strong 2-year-old fillies this year, and the gap between what she ran in the Demoiselle and like what we've seen in the juvenile and our juvenile fillies and the race at Churchill, which name is escaping me, is a pretty decent one. So she's got some ground to make up, but everything says maybe with a better trip she could do it if she handles, if she can get in the clear, but she definitely has some room to go.
Yeah, and for those who are making the case that the rail was not the place to be, I should also point out that the runner-up Milfoy was right down the rail for the final 3/8 of a mile of this race. So maybe that really hindered her, and she's much the best coming out of this race. I mean, things like that are always a possibility, but I think the preponderance of evidence doesn't really support that the rail was a significant disadvantage given how well many horses ran down there. Including in the next race we're going to talk about, the Gopher Wand. The winner, Sharp Star, she wasn't on the rail, but the runner-up was. And kind of like in the Remsen, these top 2 finishers really put on a show, drew well clear of the rest of the field. And Sharp Star, this 3-year-old New York-bred filly, has just really taken a step forward all of a sudden, kind of out of the blue in her last 2 starts.
Yeah, we talked about this race on the forecast, and it's one you just don't really know in these spots, but she certainly backed it up that her last race was no fluke. She ran the same figure for me, a 119, both last start and this start. The runner-up, Portal Creek, who absolutely ran huge, shipping in, I think it was from Parks, coming in off a winning streak. And just was really tough to run down. Actually got a 120 for me for the win. But Sharp Star was just able to wear her down, didn't give up. But these two really did put on a show. And the others were basically never involved. It was a 2-horse race much of the way. The favorite, or co-favorite, I don't remember which one was actually the betting favorite, but Noda Madeline just didn't have anything. She tucked in behind those two, Dig Little running thereafter, and there was nothing from anybody else in the field. So it was basically a match race, and Sharp Star just got up.
Yeah, Nona Madeline is one of these horses that had never raced over a wet track before, and kind of like Malathaat in the Demoiselle, she did not look at all comfortable racing on the inside, taking that kickback. She never really produced a run, though. I mean, they tried to get her to the outside at the top of the stretch, and she just had nothing. She never produced a run. But the top 2, they just ran a couple fast races. Portal Creek, she was that horse I was alluding to, who was down towards the inside throughout. She battled on really gamely and almost held off Sharp Star. It took Sharp Star a long time to wear her down. Both these look like nice horses, and Sharp Star, being a 3-year-old filly, she's an exciting one for next year because she really was not on anybody's radar as one of the top 3-year-old fillies out there as of a few weeks ago. But these last 2 performances, they look legit. So it'll be interesting to see what she can do from here. Let's move on to Sunday's card at Aqueduct, where things dried out considerably. And we'll begin with one of the stakes races they ran on Sunday. There were 3 of them. None of them were particularly fast, but we can talk about one of those. That was the New York Stallion Stakes 5th Avenue division for the 2-year-old New York-bred fillies going 7 furlongs. Actually, not New York-bred fillies, fillies by New York sires. And one of those New York sires who's made a real impression this year is Laoban, and his daughter Laoban on a Prayer just absolutely dominated this field of overmatched fillies. Not the fastest in the grand scheme of things among 2-year-old fillies throughout the country, but she was a dominant winner of this race.
She was. She got a 96 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. She did it really easily, though. I like the way she was able to rate off of horses, just like she did the last time. And she's just winning really easy. So I'm not going to tie those, just typecast her by the speed figure she's running, because she's got the kind of style and the way she's doing it that she's one that I think probably could run a little bit faster. Those kind of decisions, we talk about them all the time on the forecast, and really it just comes down to what kind of price she's going to be in field she shows up against. But she looks like a good one, and I totally agree with you with Laoban. He has been quite the revelation for a sire. I don't know that he's one a whole lot of people were looking forward to as a freshman sire this year, but his progeny have been great.
Yeah, that Uncle Mo is really turning into a sire of sires pretty quickly. Nyquist has also had some good runners this year as a son of Uncle Mo. And Laoban, I think this was his third stakes winner now. I mean, he's also been the sire of Simply Ravishing, who won the Alcibiades, Keep Me in Mind, who obviously placed in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile and just won the Kentucky Jockey Club. So a lot of good 2-year-olds out there for Laoban, and notable for him because obviously as a horse that was standing in New York, it's not like he was getting the best mares this first year, and I believe they're moving him to Kentucky, so it'll be interesting to see what he can do with some better mares in future seasons, but definitely a good freshman season for that sire. Another race to discuss from Sunday's card at Aqueduct was an allowance race that they ran in the middle of the day, I believe the 5th race, and that was won by the New York-bred Chestertown. This horse cost a pretty penny as a 2-year-old in training. I believe they paid $2 million for him. It's taken him a little bit while to kind of reach his peak performance, but it looks like he's getting there now because he earned a pretty impressive speed figure here and won fairly decisively.
Yeah, he did. He got a 119 for the win. Now, I'll be the first to admit the track was a bit tricky on Sunday, unlike Saturday. I wound up kind of doing a split where races 1, 2, and 3 were rated together, and races 4 through the end of the card were rated together, and I had the track a little bit faster for those first 3. So it's possible as I review this, it could go down maybe 3 or 4 points at the most, and it definitely won't go any higher. But regardless of whether it's a 115 or a 119, I mean, I thought this was a really strong effort from him. There was a decent amount of pace. It really kind of picked up at the half mile, but he was able to just sit in behind even when things quickened up. He was able to get a little bit closer and just took over wide. I think he was wide pretty much all the way around, definitely on the turn, and just looked good doing it. So he's one that definitely seems to have a future and seems to be moving in the right direction.
Yeah, he's a horse that I kind of regarded with a little bit of skepticism early in the year when they were pointing him towards the Kentucky Derby, running him in some of those prep races. But now that they've focused on New York-bred races and have begun to bring him along a little bit more slowly, I think he's finally doing that developing that he may have lacked early on. And he's a horse that's proven in the past. He handles 2 turns. 1 1/8 is no problem for him. So they should have some fun with him if they keep him at Aqueduct over the winter, which I think they should because there are plenty of opportunities there. I know it's always tempting once a horse runs one big speed figure to go after some tougher open company races, but they tried that with him in the past, and there are obviously plenty of New York-bred races going route distances throughout the winter at Aqueduct, so it'll be interesting to see where they go with him. And regarding the pace, I agree. I thought Category 1, it was 4th in here, ran pretty well contesting that pace and really just lost 2nd at the end. He's, I guess, one of the horses that might lead you to believe that this figure's a little bit high because he had never run a number like this before, though he's also a horse that's coming out of a race on November 13th where I thought it was also difficult to really gauge whether the track changed or not. So there are a bunch of horses running back out of that race, I think on Thursday this week at Aqueduct, so I'll be interested to see how they do. But I agree with you. It's one that you want to watch moving forward.
Yeah, and I did look at Category 1, and the thing was it's not going to matter whether he's a 110 or a 115. Either way, it's a pretty big jump, and I think he ran a solid performance. The one note I will make about Chestertown is he's now 2 for 2 at Aqueduct over the winter on these it's still kind of a weird track at Aqueduct. He did run well at Saratoga a couple back with a decent figure, but if anything, he certainly doesn't mind the Aqueduct surface and handles one that others have proven it can be difficult sometimes. Other horses just don't take to this winter track these days.
Before we leave Aqueduct, let's just mention one more race, a 2-year-old maiden event from this past Friday. This one was taking place on the turf, going 6 furlongs, and we saw a first-time starter get the job done at a pretty big price, as Mr. Karis won a rare New York winner for Neil Drysdale. She came from off the pace and showed, I thought, a good deal of professionalism for a 2-year-old filly to come through on the inside and split horses.
Yeah, it was definitely an impressive race visually. She got a 98 TimeformUS speed figure. So for comparison, I mean, that's what we were talking about for the Demoiselle winner. So real nice effort first off the bench for connections that don't often win in New York and don't often win first time out. So it may come as a bit of a surprise. It certainly did the bettors. I think she was 23-1 or something like that, lit up the tote board a bit. But I don't think there was anything phony about this win. And you like to see that professionalism where a young horse will come through the inside like that.
Yeah, she was off a little bit slowly. She got held up in traffic at about the quarter pole. Kendrick Carmouche, who was riding her, really had to wait for quite a while. You could have mistaken him for Joel Rosario, I think, during this ride, because he waited for quite a long time on the inside, finally got through, and she burst through that opening once things parted for her, coming to the 8th pole and finished up strongly to win. And it should be mentioned, Kendrick Carmouche, with all of these winners he had at Aqueduct this past weekend, he also wrapped up the Aqueduct jockey title for the fall meet. That just ended this week. They'll begin the long winter meet this upcoming Thursday, so just want to mention that. But Mr. Karis, this filly who won first time out, she was a $525,000 yearling purchase. She's got a very nice pedigree. She's a daughter of Malibu Moon. She's a half to a turf winner, as well as some other horses who won some stakes sprinting on the dirt. The Dam is a half sister to Dominus, who is a sire and I think was a winner on both dirt and turf during his racing career. So definitely one to watch down the line. Let's now move on to a couple other venues. First, Los Alamitos, where this past weekend they ran the other Grade 1 race that took place in the country on Saturday. That was the Starlet for the 2-year-old fillies. Now, if we talked about the Cigar Mile not being the strongest Grade 1, well, I think we have to use some more forceful adjectives for this race to describe how below typical Grade 1 quality this was. Obviously, this race was marred by Princess Noor getting pulled up at the top of the stretch, and also the other horse that was expected to do well, Astute, just not showing up at all. So just kind of a topsy-turvy result here.
Yeah, it was. It was a shame about Princess Noor, who I don't think there's much doubt she was going to win the race pretty easily and kind of keep improving off that Breeders' Cup effort that she had. But unfortunately, we'll probably never know, because I think I read that she's being retired with a soft tissue injury. She is going to be okay from what I understand, so that's good news at least. And as you say, Astute didn't show up at all. She actually went off second choice at only 6-5, and really never looked like a factor at any point. The only thing I can chalk it up to is she just didn't handle the low south surface, which is something I've seen quite a bit. I've likened this track to Kentucky Downs, where horses either seem to love it or hate it, and generally I'll put a line through those races when they show up elsewhere, so maybe she's worth giving another shot. But other than that, it was a fairly slow race, and that the winner, Varda, who was actually the third Bob Baffert horse in the field of 5, ran a 95 coming from well off the pace. We did have all the fractions highlighted in red. And it's actually one of the bigger discrepancies you'll see for a route race, where the runner-up was beaten 1.5 lengths, but because of that hot pace, actually got a speed figure from us 10 points higher at 105. So not totally terrible. She was actually dueling with her stablemate Princess Noor when that one went wrong, and she kind of looked like a winner for a long way, but just couldn't quite hold off her other stablemate. But I thought she ran fairly well. The others, not so much.
Yeah, it's one of those races watching it where, I mean, coming around the far turn, if you didn't know that Princess Noor was going to get pulled up, you might have said that Varda was odds on to be out of the money, because it looked like she was doing no running. I mean, Drayden Van Dyke was motivating her around the 3/8 pole. She was just going nowhere and really was making no progress until they got well into the stretch, and the horses in front of her just, that taxing pace really took its toll, and they stopped, and she just kept plugging along. She really never picked up the pace. She was probably slowing down herself. herself, but she was able to grind down those very weary leaders. And as for Astute, I think also what might have been troubling for her is that she didn't break that well, and right from the start, she got put in behind horses, a situation that she had never encountered before because she had led from gate to wire in each of her first 2 starts. So that, I think, was difficult, especially going 2 turns for the first time to just be behind horses taking dirt the entire way. So I guess you might want to give her another chance, especially if she's cutting back in distance next time. But just kind of a weird race, especially for a grade 1. The other graded stakes that they ran this past weekend at Los Alamitos was the grade 3 Bayacoa on Sunday, and kind of a similar situation. This was probably a pretty weak event even for a grade 3, as most of the horses that were competing here are just more optional claiming types, and that's certainly the case with the winner, Proud Emma, who, not quite to the degree of Varda and the Starlet, but she just was kind of the last survivor as horses dropped away inside of her.
Yeah, this is a race I haven't had a chance to actually watch yet. I don't have the figure. My assistant does this one, but it's going to be, I would guess, in the 115 range or so. The pace looked like it was fairly quick, especially picked up at the half mile before the race just looks like it was kind of falling apart figure-wise, and I assume that that's what the running lines look like as well, where Proud Emma just kind of clunked up and passed a bunch of tired horses. Now, to be fair, it is her, she does seem to be better on dirt. All of her wins, I think, have come on dirt. She's tried turf a few times to no avail, so hopefully that experiment's over, and she does at least seem to be moving in the right direction. So, she was, it's easy to say you want the winner as the one out of this, but that's the only one I could see getting too excited about in here.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want any horses out of this race. It seemed like a slow race for one at this level. The complexion of the race was changed a little bit after the start, when Stellar Sound did not break well, and then her rider Victor Espinoza kind of dropped his hands and allowed her to make a very premature move from last all the way up to take the lead by about 2 lengths on the backstretch. I think that's what forced the pace to quicken so much in the middle portion of the race, but it definitely took its toll on her as she couldn't sustain that run and she faded late. And I just didn't see it as a very strong race and kind of wanted nobody out of here moving forward. Let's wrap things up for this week by discussing a couple of the stakes from that Claiming Crown card at Gulfstream. 2 of the faster races that took place were the Jewel and the Canterbury. The Claiming Crown Jewel, that's going 1 1/8 on the main track for the older horses, or the 3-year-olds and up, I should say. And we did see a victory by a 3-year-old, the heavy favorite Jesus' Team, who was coming out of a runner-up finish in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. We've seen a lot of these Breeders' Cup horses bounce off big efforts coming back on relatively short rest, and I think he does fall into that category, even though he got the victory here.
Yeah, his figure definitely regressed a little bit. I think he had run a 124 when he was second to Nick's Go. He regressed to a 115 here, but he did get the job done. He was up tracking a pretty quick pace. We had the 3/4 coated in red, and at 2 to 5, I mean, you'd like to see him win a little more easy than this, but I don't think he ran his best here, and that 115 was good enough. The surprise in the race for me was Storm Runner, who set a pretty quick pace and gave Jesus' Team all he wanted, and actually got a 116 TimeformUS speed figure.
Yeah, and I do want to mention the training job by Jesus' Team's conditioner, Jose D'Angelo. This horse, I mean, you kind of wonder how he's eligible for this race, because it's kind of a starter allowance situation, these Claiming Crown races are. And Jesus' Team began his career in some very cheap races, and his current trainer got this horse on a trainer switch. I don't know if it was a private purchase or not, earlier this year, and he's just completely turned the trajectory of his career around. He's run some much faster races, has ascended into graded stakes company, and has found real success. So just a real rags to riches story with Jesus' Team. And I think he's better than the speed figure here, and it'll be interesting to see if, assuming they keep him in training next year, I guess they will, what he can do, because he did run a pretty fast race, as you said, last time in that dirt mile.
Yeah, he's got quite the resume. I mean, he was a third, albeit a distant third in the Preakness. He was a close third in the Jim Dandy. That's second in the Breeders' Cup. So he's definitely got some better races to run back to. Now, I will say he's been running often all year long. I think this was his 10th 10th start already. So it could just be that maybe he needs a little bit of a freshening or a break, but he's certainly been a warrior this year. He just keeps showing up in the entry box.
And the final race we'll discuss on this week's podcast is the Claiming Crown Canterbury. This one was going 5 furlongs on the turf at Gulfstream, and another heavy favorite winner as Faya remains undefeated on the turf. He's now 5 for 5 on that surface and switching surfaces in his third career start, and he only won this race by a length and a half, but if you watch it, I mean, he was just in command really for the entire running.
Yeah, he is a quick horse, that's for sure. He even broke maybe just a little bit tardy coming out of there, which could have been trouble for some horses in the rail in a race this short, but he just has that really quick turn of foot. Once he got his feet under him, he really exploded to the front and just basically toyed with the field. Nobody was catching him. He only got a 113 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, but I think this is the case. He did what he had to do. He's run in the high teens and the low 120s before, and I think when challenged, that's easily within his scope again.
Yeah, he's a horse that I know the connections have high hopes for. I mean, they bought him at auction last summer for $400,000 after that victory in a Maryland-bred allowance race coming out of some claiming races. So they took a real risk with this horse. But, I mean, he's continued to improve for Tom Albertrani in the fall and into this race. And as you said, he didn't have the best start. He rushed up because he's just so quick. He can take command of these races in the early going. And he won, essentially geared down at the end of this race. And with these turf sprinters, I mean, we can see horses move right up from allowance races to some of the top turf sprints in the country within just a few starts, because it seems like if you got a fast horse, doesn't matter if they're fast against cheaper horses or fast against grade 1 horses, they just can run some better horses off their feet. And Faya seems like the kind that could be pointed to a race like the grade 1 Jaipur later this next summer. If he stays in form, we'll just have to see what happens between now and then.
Yeah, that's the thing with turf sprinters. There's not always a lot of top graded spots to pick from, and as you mentioned, the Jaipur 7 furlongs, that could be a totally different game. It's hard to say at this point, but he's one of the more exciting turf sprinters we've seen in a while.
For sure. Well, that's all the stakes racing to recap this week. We will continue on our usual schedule through at least this week. We'll see what happens as things get closer to the holiday season. But we will do our TimeformUS forecast this upcoming Friday to handicap some racing, probably at Gulfstream Park. I know they're running a few graded stakes there this weekend. I believe the Rampart and the Sugar Swirl are scheduled. Those are a couple of graded stakes races for the fillies and mares. So we'll look at some of those and maybe skip around a little bit. I know Craig doesn't mind to do that. So stay tuned for that TimeformUS forecast on Friday. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back with another podcast on Friday.